4,000 years ago, on the fertile banks of the Nile, a civilization emerged whose customs of love, marriage, and family life continue to astonish scholars today. When the Greek historian Herodotus visited Egypt, he found many practices completely reversed compared to his own culture. He wrote of women going to market and conducting trade, while men stayed at home weaving, of lovers openly holding hands and kissing, of poetry unabashedly celebrating passion and desire. Unlike other ancient civilizations, where marriage was defined by elaborate religious rites, in Egypt it was deeply personal, pragmatic, and centered on the stability of the household rather than ceremonial display. The geography of Egypt profoundly shaped this culture. Amid vast deserts, the Nile created a narrow ribbon of fertile land, nourished by its annual floods. Agriculture dictated the rhythm of life. Sowing, harvesting, and seasonal festivals were tied to the river's rise and retreat. Villages and towns stretched along its banks in clusters of mud brick homes built close together. Extended families lived communally, and neighbors relied on one another for support during childbirth, child-rearing, and work. Courtyards rang with the sound of women grinding grain and baking bread, children laughing at play, and men returning from fields, fishing, or royal construction projects. Family responsibilities were shared rather than divided strictly along gender lines. Egyptian society was hierarchical, yet deeply communal. At the apex stood the pharaoh, political ruler and divine figure, followed by nobles, priests, and scribes who managed temples, taxes, and administration. Below them were artisans, farmers, and laborers who sustained the kingdom's economic foundation. Yet, despite this stratification, the customs of love and marriage cut across all classes. Whether noble or commoner, the essential principles of partnership, mutual respect, and family loyalty were shared throughout Egyptian society. One of Egypt's most striking features was the legal and social status of women. Unlike in Greece or Rome, Egyptian women enjoyed extensive rights. They could own property independently, inherit wealth, conduct business, and even initiate divorce. Marriage did not subsume a woman's legal identity. Her assets remained her own, safeguarded by contractual agreements that specified dowries and provisions in the event of separation. This autonomy afforded Egyptian women a level of agency unparalleled in much of the ancient world, and fostered relationships that were cooperative rather than purely hierarchical. Egyptian attitudes toward love and sexuality were equally remarkable. Affection was celebrated rather than concealed. Couples clasped hands and embraced in public, acts that astonished foreign visitors. Premarital relationships carried little stigma, and love poetry offered candid expressions of longing and desire from both male and female voices. Sexuality was seen as a natural gift of the gods, neither shameful nor sinful, and it infused both art and literature with vitality and warmth. Wisdom texts advised husbands to treat their wives kindly and to value harmony at home, revealing a cultural recognition that emotional partnership was as essential to family stability as fertility and lineage. Marriage in Egypt was strikingly free of ritual. Unlike many cultures that relied on formal religious ceremonies, Egyptians considered a union established when a woman brought her belongings into her husband's house. A written contract might record property arrangements, dowries, and obligations in case of divorce, but no temple rites or priestly blessings were required. These documents were pragmatic rather than symbolic. They secured a woman's property and ensured financial support for children. reflecting a view of marriage grounded in partnership and mutual responsibility rather than rigid ceremony. Family life formed the cornerstone of Egyptian society. Most households were modest, with several children contributing to family work from an early age. Fathers were actively involved in childcare, a notable contrast to many other ancient cultures, while mothers managed the home and participated in local trade or labor when needed. Fertility was celebrated as a divine blessing, with prayers offered to Hathor and Isis for protection during pregnancy and childbirth. Childbirth was a communal event attended by midwives, and protective amulets shaped like hippopotami, ankhs, or Bes figures were placed near infants to ward off harm. These practices reflected both the joys and dangers of family life, where survival of mother and child was never guaranteed. This world reached its zenith during the New Kingdom, around 1400 BCE. It was an age of imperial expansion and monumental architecture. Thebes flourished as a cultural capital, and pharaohs such as Amenhotep III oversaw an empire stretching into Nubia and the Levant. Yet, amid the grandeur of temples and royal tombs, the daily lives of ordinary Egyptians remained rooted in the household, the fields, and the enduring bonds of marriage and kinship. Their approach to love and family blended pragmatism with profound affection, viewing marriage not merely as an earthly contract, but as a union that could continue into eternity. Courtship and romantic love. In ancient Egypt, the beginnings of love were found not in arranged spectacles, but in the ordinary rhythms of daily life, at markets, along the riverbanks of the Nile, during harvest festivals or temple gatherings. Young men and women met through family connections, neighborhood ties, or work. There were no formalized rituals for courtship. Instead, relationships grew organically amid the interactions of community life. Music, dance, and laughter were central to these encounters, especially during festivals when the rigid boundaries of daily labor loosened and social mingling flourished. Gifts played a vital role in expressing affection. Flowers, especially the lotus, symbolized love and rebirth, appearing frequently in poetry and art as tokens of romantic devotion. Jewelry, fragrant oils, and sweet foods were also common offerings. Even modest gifts carried symbolic weight. A simple bead necklace or colored stone ring could convey deep emotion. Such exchanges reflected both the sincerity of personal feelings and the cultural appreciation for beauty and symbolism. Egyptian attitudes toward sexuality mirrored this openness. Premarital relationships carried little stigma, and physical intimacy was considered a natural and pleasurable part of existence, granted by the gods rather than condemned as sinful. Mythology itself reflected this acceptance. Tales of deities like Isis and Osiris, or Hathor, often intertwined love, desire, and fertility. Sexuality was not divorced from spirituality, but embraced as integral to the human and divine experience alike. Yet love in Egypt extended far beyond physical attraction. Emotional intimacy, companionship, and mutual respect formed the foundation of lasting unions. Wisdom literature urged husbands to treat their wives with kindness, to listen to them and support them. Similar texts counseled wives to nurture harmony and uphold familial responsibilities. These teachings revealed that Egyptians understood marriage not solely as an economic arrangement, but as a partnership of hearts and duties. Festivals and public celebrations played an important role in fostering courtship. Events such as the Opet Festival or the Valley Festival drew communities together in processions, feasts, and music. During these gatherings, men and women encountered one another outside the rigid routines of work, allowing love to spark amid joy and festivity.
The Nile itself, with its lotus-filled banks and cool evening breezes, provided an ever-present backdrop for romance, serving as both lifeline and meeting place for generations. Family approval remained significant, especially regarding property and inheritance, but personal affection held weight as well. Marriage often combined pragmatic considerations with genuine emotional bonds. Surviving poems and legal records alike suggest that while parents played a role in sanctioning unions, the consent and attraction of the couple were equally valued, an unusually balanced dynamic for the ancient world. This openness to love and its expression set Egypt apart from many contemporary cultures. In Greece and Rome, women's voices were muted, and love often shrouded in secrecy or shame. In Egypt, by contrast, affection was public and celebrated, immortalized in art depicting couples hand in hand or seated side by side in tender closeness. Their concept of romance was neither idealized nor repressed, but embraced as part of life's natural order, as enduring and life-giving as the river that sustained their world.
Marriage as partnership. Marriage in ancient Egypt was fundamentally practical, yet it was infused with affection and mutual responsibility. Unlike many civilizations where wedding ceremonies were central social spectacles, Egyptian unions were quietly formed through the establishment of a shared household. When a woman moved her possessions into a man's home, the marriage was considered complete. There were no temple rites, no priestly blessings, and no elaborate festivals marking the transition. Instead, the act of cohabitation signified the partnership, reflecting a cultural emphasis on function and stability over ritual. Legal contracts formed the backbone of Egyptian marriages. These written agreements detailed property arrangements, dowries, and provisions in case of divorce. They served to protect the woman's existing assets and guaranteed her rights should the marriage dissolve. Such contracts ensured that women retained financial independence and security, an extraordinary concept in the ancient world. A wife did not lose her property to her husband. Rather, she entered the union with her wealth intact, and both partners' rights were clearly defined. This legal framework reveals a society that viewed marriage not only as an emotional bond, but as an equitable economic partnership. Within the household, roles were distinct yet complementary. Men typically worked in agriculture, construction, or skilled crafts, contributing the primary labor needed for subsistence. Women managed domestic affairs, grinding grain, baking bread, brewing beer, and caring for children. But their responsibilities extended beyond the home. Many women engaged in trade, textile production, or estate management, and wealthier women sometimes oversaw servants or laborers. This distribution of tasks did not signify inequality. Rather, it reflected the practical demands of a society where survival depended on cooperation. Affection between spouses is evident in both artistic and literary sources. Tomb paintings frequently depict husbands and wives seated together, hands clasped or arms around one another's shoulders. These intimate portrayals were strikingly different from the rigid, hierarchical depictions common in Mesopotamian or Greek art. Egyptian couples were often represented as equals, sharing space and gestures of tenderness that spoke to emotional closeness. Love poems and advice literature echo this intimacy, encouraging kindness, patience, and respect between partners. One piece of wisdom literature advises, "Do not be harsh with her, for she has her own opinion. Fill her stomach, clothe her back. This is the proper care of a wife." Marriage in Egypt was not solely about the couple. It was embedded in a broader network of family and community. Extended relatives frequently lived nearby, and households were part of tight-knit neighborhoods where support and cooperation were essential.
Festivals, communal work, and shared resources reinforced bonds beyond the immediate family. This social structure created resilience, a safety net that helped families endure the challenges of flood cycles, famine, and disease. Religious belief also shaped marital values. Although no specific gods presided over weddings, deities like Hathor, Isis, and Bes were invoked for fertility, protection, and harmony within the household. Couples prayed for healthy children, prosperity, and mutual happiness. These prayers highlight how marriage was viewed as a sacred partnership, even in the absence of formal ritual. The home itself was a spiritual space, with household shrines where offerings were made and protective amulets placed to safeguard love and family. Fidelity within marriage was highly valued. Adultery, particularly by women, was treated as a serious breach of trust, with potential legal and social consequences. Men were expected to remain faithful as well, though the enforcement of fidelity could vary by class and circumstance. Despite these expectations, divorce was a recognized and straightforward process. Either spouse could initiate it, and contracts outlined financial settlements to ensure fairness, especially toward the woman and any children. This pragmatic approach to marital dissolution reflects the Egyptian emphasis on stability and equity, rather than punitive moral judgment. Royal marriages presented a striking contrast to common practice. Among the elite, sibling unions and polygamous arrangements were justified by divine precedent intended to preserve dynastic purity and political alliances. Pharaohs often married multiple wives, with a principal queen holding preeminence. Yet even at this exalted level, art and inscriptions reveal genuine affection, as in the case of Ramesses II and his beloved queen Nefertari, whose tomb inscriptions praise her beauty and wisdom in poetic terms. For commoners, marriage was typically monogamous and grounded in mutual support. The ideal was a harmonious household where spouses worked together, raised children, and cared for aging parents. Such marriages were not arranged purely for economic gain. Affection and personal choice clearly played a role. The survival of love poetry written in the voices of both men and women suggests that romantic attraction was an accepted and celebrated prelude to these unions. The Egyptian model of marriage challenges many modern assumptions about the ancient world. Far from being rigidly patriarchal, it afforded women legal autonomy and emphasized partnership rather than subjugation. It combined pragmatism, property contracts, mutual obligations, with emotional intimacy and respect. It lacked elaborate rituals, yet carried profound spiritual significance, extending the bonds of love and family beyond death itself. In this balance of practical needs and human affection, Egyptian marriage remains one of history's most nuanced and enduring approaches to partnership.
Family life and child rearing. Family lay at the heart of ancient Egyptian society. Beyond the monumental temples, royal courts, and sprawling markets, life for the vast majority of Egyptians revolved around the household, a small mud-brick home where parents, children, and sometimes grandparents lived and worked together. These families were the backbone of the kingdom, forming the basic unit upon which agriculture, craft production, and social order depended. Understanding their daily rhythms and values offers a window into a civilization that prized stability, continuity, and mutual care above all else. Most families lived in modest houses built from sun-dried mud brick, materials readily available along the Nile. These homes typically consisted of 2 or 3 rooms arranged around a small open courtyard. The courtyard served as the center of domestic life. Here grain was ground, bread baked, laundry washed, and children played under the watchful eyes of their parents. Roofs, flat and sturdy,
doubled as sleeping spaces on hot nights or as storage areas for drying food. Wealthier families enjoyed larger homes with multiple rooms and internal staircases, but even these reflected practical rather than ostentatious design. Households were often multi-generational. Aging parents remained with their adult children, contributing what labor they could and passing down wisdom and traditions. Grandparents played key roles in child rearing, sharing stories, songs, and practical skills. Extended kin, siblings, cousins, in-laws, usually lived nearby, creating tightly knit neighborhoods bound by mutual dependence. This communal structure offered vital support in times of hardship, illness, or seasonal labor demands. Motherhood held a revered place in Egyptian culture. Women were celebrated as life-givers and nurturers, closely associated with goddesses like Hathor and Isis, who embodied maternal care and protection. Mothers were primarily responsible for infants and young children, breastfeeding and tending to their early needs. They oversaw the household economy, grinding grain, brewing beer, cooking meals, and managing textiles. But this work was never seen as trivial. Rather, it was honored as essential to the family's survival and prosperity. Fathers, too, were actively involved in raising children. Unlike in many later patriarchal societies, where child-rearing was considered women's work, Egyptian men participated directly in teaching skills, disciplining, and providing moral guidance. Farmers taught sons to plow and sow. Artisans trained children in their crafts. Scribes encouraged literacy and introduced children to religious and administrative traditions. Artistic depictions show fathers holding their children on their laps, offering food or guiding their steps, a testament to their affectionate role. Childbirth was a moment of both joy and anxiety. Infant and maternal mortality rates were high, and families turned to divine protection to safeguard mother and child. Expectant mothers prayed to Hathor, goddess of fertility and motherhood, and to Taweret, the hippopotamus-headed goddess, who warded off danger during labor. Protective amulets bearing the images of these deities were worn around the neck or placed in the birthing area. Incantations were recited, and figurines of the dwarf god Bes were stationed nearby to scare away evil spirits with his fierce expression. Birth usually took place at home, assisted by female relatives or experienced midwives. After delivery, rituals ensured the newborn's safe integration into the household. The umbilical cord might be buried beneath the threshold, symbolically rooting the child in the home. Infants were swaddled in linen, nursed for several years, and carried in slings while mothers worked. Weaning marked a significant milestone, often celebrated within the family. Names held great significance in Egyptian culture, believed to confer protection and identity. A child's name often invoked a deity, such as Amenhotep or Merit Isis, reflecting hopes for divine favor. Names could also commemorate ancestors, affirming continuity across generations. To erase someone's name, as in cases of damnatio memoria, was to annihilate their memory and spirit. Thus, the naming of a child was both personal and profoundly spiritual. Childhood in ancient Egypt was brief by modern standards. Children were expected to contribute to household labor from an early age, carrying water, tending animals, gathering fuel, or assisting in fields. Boys often apprenticed under their fathers, learning trades such as carpentry, masonry, or metalwork. Daughters helped with cooking, weaving, and caring for younger siblings. Yet childhood was not devoid of joy. Archaeological finds revealed toys such as carved animals, balls, and board games like Senet, suggesting moments of play amidst daily chores. Formal education was largely reserved for the elite. Sons of scribes and officials attended temple schools, where they learned reading, writing, mathematics, and religious texts. These institutions produced the bureaucrats who maintained Egypt's vast administrative machinery. Literacy conferred significant social mobility, and families with means aspired to place at least one son within the scribal class. For most children, however, practical training within the family sufficed, teaching them to farm, fish, weave, or trade according to their community's needs. Egyptian wisdom literature provides insight into the values instilled in children. Texts like the Instructions of Ptah-hotep or the Instructions of Ani urge humility, respect for elders, honesty, and fairness. Obedience to parents and loyalty to family were paramount virtues. Children were taught to honor the gods, uphold Ma'at, the principle of cosmic order and justice, and contribute to the harmony of household and community. Moral lessons were often conveyed through proverbs and fables, embedding ethical guidance in memorable stories. Life expectancy in ancient Egypt was short by modern standards, averaging perhaps 30 to 40 years. Children faced dangers from malnutrition, infectious diseases, and accidents. Families relied on a combination of herbal remedies, magical incantations, and prayers to combat illness. Honey served as an antiseptic. Garlic and onions were believed to strengthen the body. Amulets inscribed with protective spells were tied around the neck. Healing was both a practical and spiritual endeavor, reflecting the Egyptians' holistic understanding of health. Despite hardships, evidence suggests that Egyptian parents deeply cherished their children. Tomb inscriptions mourn the loss of sons and daughters, and stela commemorate beloved family members with tenderness. Art frequently portrays children naked with side locks of hair, playing beside their parents or clinging to their legs. These intimate depictions convey the emotional bonds at the core of family life, bonds as recognizable today as they were millennia ago. Family in Egypt extended beyond the nuclear unit to encompass a broader community. Neighbors assisted during childbirth, shared food during lean seasons, and took in orphan children when necessary. This collective responsibility strengthened social cohesion and ensured survival in a landscape where the river's bounty could fluctuate dramatically. Festivals and communal rituals reinforced these bonds, offering occasions for families to gather, give thanks, and renew social ties. Spirituality permeated Egyptian family life. Household shrines honored protective deities. Daily offerings of bread, beer, and incense sought blessings for health and prosperity. Ancestors were venerated, their spirits invited to partake in family meals and watch over the living. Tombs depicted not only the deceased, but entire family groups, reaffirming that love and kinship endured beyond death. In this worldview, family was eternal, a continuum unbroken by mortality. Families were the foundation of Egypt's social and economic stability. They transmitted skills, preserved cultural traditions, and ensured the workforce needed for agriculture and monumental construction. Marriage bound families together, forging alliances and consolidating property. But it was the raising of children, the next generation, that guaranteed Egypt's continuity. Every household, no matter how humble, was part of this grand cycle of life, death, and renewal.
In examining Egyptian family life, we find both striking differences and timeless similarities. Their homes lacked our modern conveniences, yet their hopes and anxieties resonate across millennia. The joy of birth, the challenges of raising children, the grief of loss, and the enduring love that binds parents to their offspring. It is within these intimate domestic spaces, far from the splendor of temples and palaces, that the human heart of ancient Egypt beats most strongly.
Challenges and divorce. Marriage in ancient Egypt, while grounded in partnership and affection, was not without its challenges. Life along the Nile, though sustained by fertile soil and predictable floods, were shaped by hard labor, disease, and the uncertainties of survival. These pressures inevitably strained households, testing the bonds between spouses and the resilience of family structures. The Egyptians, pragmatic in all aspects of life, approached marital conflict and dissolution with the same practical outlook that characterized their unions, emphasizing fairness, stability, and the protection of property and children. Conflicts within Egyptian marriages arose from a variety of causes. Economic hardship was a common strain. A failed harvest or the loss of employment could create tension over food and resources. Differences in personal temperament, family expectations, or fertility struggles also played a role. Infidelity, however, was the most serious breach of trust. Adultery, particularly on the part of women, was treated as a grave offense that could dissolve a marriage and tarnish reputations. Men were expected to remain faithful as well, though evidence suggests enforcement was more flexible for them than for women, reflecting broader gender norms despite Egypt's relative equality. Art and literature hint at the emotional toll of marital discord. Wisdom texts warn men against neglecting or mistreating their wives, urging them to fill her belly, clothe her back, and treat her with respect. Conversely, stories of unfaithful spouses or quarrelsome households served as cautionary tales, reinforcing ideals of harmony and loyalty. The emphasis was not on punishment for its own sake, but on restoring or preserving balance, a reflection of the central Egyptian value of Ma'at, the cosmic order of justice and harmony. Divorce in ancient Egypt was not stigmatized in the way it would be in many later cultures. Rather than a moral failing, it was viewed as a practical solution when a marriage could no longer function. Either spouse could initiate divorce, an exceptional feature in the ancient world. The process was straightforward. The couple, often with witnesses or local officials present, would formally declare the dissolution of their union. There was no requirement for priestly involvement or temple ritual. Just as marriage itself lacked formal ceremony, so too did its ending. Written contracts often facilitated divorce proceedings. These documents, drawn up at the time of marriage, specified what property each party brought into the union and how it would be divided if the relationship ended. Typically, the woman retained her personal property and any dowry she contributed. In some cases, she was also entitled to additional compensation, such as a third of the couple's shared assets, ensuring financial security for herself and her children. Such protections were remarkably progressive compared to contemporary societies, where women frequently lost all rights upon separation. Child custody arrangements prioritized the mother, who was usually granted primary responsibility for raising young children. This reflected both practical considerations — infants and toddlers were closely tied to maternal care — and the cultural reverence for motherhood. Fathers, however, were not excluded. They often contributed financially and maintained involvement in their children's lives, particularly in older childhood or apprenticeship. The priority was not punishment of one parent, but the continuity of the child's well-being and the stability of the broader family network. While divorce itself carried little stigma, adultery could provoke social repercussions, especially for women. Legal texts suggest that an adulterous wife risked losing property rights and could face public disgrace. In extreme cases, particularly among the elite, where political alliances were at stake, punishments ranged from forced divorce to physical penalties, though such measures were rare among commoners. For men, extramarital relationships were tolerated to a degree, particularly if they involved concubines or secondary wives, but open infidelity that disrupted household harmony was discouraged. The ideal remained mutual fidelity, rooted in respect and partnership. The economic implications of divorce were significant. Households operated as economic units. Separation required the redistribution of land, livestock, tools, and food stores. Contracts meticulously recorded these details, ensuring that neither party, especially the woman, was left destitute. This focus on property and sustenance reflects the Egyptian prioritization of practical survival over abstract moral condemnation. By safeguarding resources, divorce procedures preserved not only individual welfare, but also the broader stability of the community. Interestingly, religious belief did not cast divorce as sinful or prohibited. Egyptian gods and goddesses were invoked for protection, fertility, and harmony, but there is no evidence of divine condemnation for marital separation. This absence of religious interdiction allowed Egyptians to treat divorce as a social and legal matter rather than a spiritual failing. Marriage was sacred in its own right, but its sanctity derived from mutual care and respect rather than unbreakable permanence. When those qualities were absent, ending the union was acceptable, even wise. Among the royal family, the stakes of divorce were vastly different. Pharaohs married multiple wives, often for political alliances or dynastic continuity. Primary queens held exalted status, but secondary wives and concubines filled the royal harem. Divorce at this level could shift alliances, affect succession, and even spark conflict. While legal protections for queens existed, power dynamics at court often dictated outcomes. Despite these complexities, royal inscriptions and tomb art still idealized marital harmony, depicting pharaohs and queens as loving partners united in life and death. When compared to neighboring cultures, Egypt's approach to marital challenges appears remarkably progressive. In Mesopotamia, divorce was legally permitted but heavily skewed in favor of men, with women often left destitute or stigmatized. In Greece and Rome, marital separation carried social disgrace, and women had little to no legal autonomy. Egypt's willingness to recognize female agency in both marriage and divorce, including property rights, custody, and the ability to initiate separation, set it apart as unusually balanced for its time. Despite the temporal and cultural distance, the challenges faced by Egyptian couples feel strikingly familiar. Financial stress, infidelity, fertility struggles, and personal incompatibility are timeless human issues. The Egyptians addressed these with a mixture of pragmatism and compassion, seeking solutions that maintained social harmony and individual dignity. Their legal mechanisms protected the vulnerable. Their cultural values prized respect and fairness, and their art and literature reveal a deep yearning for partnership, even when it faltered. In this blend of practicality and humanity, ancient Egypt offers a lesson, both ancient and modern, that love and marriage are complex, evolving bonds, sustained not by ceremony alone, but by mutual care, adaptability, and the willingness to rebuild, or, when necessary, to part ways with dignity.
Royal marriages versus commoners. The institution of marriage in ancient Egypt displayed a striking duality. While the everyday unions of farmers, artisans, and scribes centered on partnership, affection, and the pragmatic concerns of family life, royal marriages operated in a vastly different sphere, one where political alliances, divine legitimacy, and dynastic continuity took precedence. Examining these two parallel systems reveals not only the diversity of Egyptian marital practices, but also the unique pressures placed upon those who bore the burden of kingship. For the vast majority of Egyptians, marriage was an organic extension of community life. Couples met through family connections, at local markets, or during festivals. The union itself was initiated simply. A woman moved her belongings into her partner's home, signifying the creation of a shared household.
Legal contracts safeguarded property and defined mutual obligations, but no priest or temple was required to solemnize the bond. Love and partnership were celebrated in poetry and art, where husbands and wives are often shown seated together, hands intertwined, gazing at one another with visible tenderness. Monogamy was the norm among commoners. A single wife and husband shared domestic responsibilities and child-rearing, supported by extended kin and community networks. Though disputes and divorces occurred, the overall ideal was one of harmony, a balanced household in which each partner's contributions, whether in field or home, were valued and necessary. This egalitarian dynamic, grounded in daily labor and mutual care, formed the foundation of Egypt's social stability. In stark contrast, marriage within the royal household was a matter of statecraft as much as personal union. Pharaohs were not merely rulers, they were living gods, embodiments of Horus on earth and sons of Ra, whose legitimacy depended on preserving divine and dynastic continuity. Royal marriages thus served multiple purposes: securing political alliances, consolidating power within the royal bloodline, and reinforcing the sacred image of the monarchy. One of the most distinctive features of Egyptian royal marriage was the practice of sibling unions. Pharaohs frequently married their sisters or half-sisters, an arrangement that, to modern sensibilities, may seem unusual, but carried profound symbolic meaning in its own time. By uniting brother and sister, figures who, in myth, mirrored the divine pairings of Isis and Osiris, or Geb and Nut, the royal family reaffirmed its divine status and ensured that sovereignty remained within the sacred lineage. This practice also prevented rival noble families from claiming legitimacy through marriage into the royal line, thereby preserving the throne's exclusivity. Polygamy was another hallmark of royal life. While commoners generally practiced monogamy, pharaohs often maintained multiple wives and concubines. These arrangements were not solely driven by personal desire. They functioned as instruments of diplomacy. Secondary wives were frequently foreign princesses, sent to Egypt as part of treaties or tribute. By marrying daughters of neighboring kings from Mitanni, Hatti, or Babylonia, the pharaoh forged alliances and secured peace on Egypt's borders. These women, though secondary in status to the great royal wife, played critical roles in cementing Egypt's international relations. At the pinnacle of the royal harem stood the great royal wife, often a sister or favored consort of the pharaoh. She was more than a spouse, she was a political and religious figure in her own right, participating in temple rituals, diplomacy, and public ceremonies. Queens like Nefertari, Tai, and Nefertari wielded considerable influence, their names immortalized in monumental inscriptions and their images carved beside their husbands on temple walls. The great royal wife often bore titles such as God's wife of Amun, linking her directly to the state religion and reinforcing the divine nature of the monarchy. Her role extended to the afterlife as well. Tomb scenes depict royal couples embracing, not as mere mortals, but as deified beings united for eternity. The prominence of queens in art and inscriptions attests to their centrality in legitimizing and sustaining the pharaoh's rule. Despite the political calculations underlying royal unions, evidence suggests that genuine affection existed between some royal couples. The relationship between Ramses II and his beloved queen Nefertari is perhaps the most celebrated example. In the magnificent temple he built for her at Abu Simbel, Ramses immortalized Nefertari in inscriptions praising her beauty, wisdom, and companionship. For whom the sun shines. Their tomb paintings show them hand in hand, equal in scale and stature, a visual declaration of love as enduring as the stone itself. Similarly, Akhenaten and Nefertiti are famously depicted in intimate family scenes, playing with their daughters beneath the rays of the Aten. These portrayals, though shaped by royal iconography, reveal a softer, more personal dimension to pharaonic marriage that resonates even across millennia. The lived experience of royal and common marriages differed profoundly. For commoners, marriage was a partnership forged in the rhythms of labor and survival, planting fields, raising children, maintaining modest homes. Their love poems and legal contracts reflect concerns for mutual care, property division, and family harmony. Royal marriages, by contrast, were bound to the machinery of empire, succession, diplomacy, divine image. Pharaohs and queens inhabited a world of palaces, harems, and court intrigue, where personal happiness was often secondary to political necessity. Yet beneath these differences lay shared cultural values. Both royal and common marriages were rooted in the ideal of partnership, in the belief that love and respect should guide the union. Both envisioned marriage as a bond that transcended death, uniting spouses in the afterlife. Tomb art, whether humble or grand, consistently depicts couples side by side, hand in hand, testifying to a shared human longing for companionship amid the temporal and eternal. The duality of Egyptian marriage, practical yet affectionate, egalitarian for commoners yet dynastic for royals, mirrored the broader structure of Egyptian society. At its core was a worldview that balanced practical needs with spiritual ideals. For the common people, this meant cultivating harmony at home and ensuring continuity of family and community. For the royal family, it meant projecting cosmic order and divine legitimacy, securing Egypt's place in the world and the gods' favor in the afterlife. Royal marital practices also influenced art, religion, and politics throughout the kingdom. Temples celebrating queens elevated female divinity. Treaties sealed by royal marriages reshaped international relations. Even among commoners, the royal model, with its imagery of eternal union, reinforced the notion that marriage, though earthly in function, held celestial significance. In studying both royal and common marriages, we see two parallel narratives unfolding in ancient Egypt. One is intimate, couples meeting at markets, exchanging lotus flowers, raising children by the Nile. The other is monumental, queens and pharaohs bound in dynastic unions, immortalized on temple walls and in hymns to the gods. Together, these narratives form a composite picture of Egyptian love and family, at once practical and profound, earthly and divine. Through them, we glimpse a society that embraced both the ordinary joys of partnership and the extraordinary demands of kingship, united in the enduring human quest for love, stability, and meaning.
Eternal bond, marriage and afterlife. For the ancient Egyptians, love and marriage did not end with death. In their worldview, the bonds formed in life endured into eternity, transcending the mortal body and continuing in the afterlife. This belief shaped not only their funerary practices, but also the very way couples related to one another during life. To live well with one's spouse was to ensure harmony not only on earth, but also in the world beyond, a world they envisioned as a perfected reflection of their earthly existence. Central to Egyptian belief was the notion of the Ka and Ba, the vital spiritual components of every individual. The Ka represented life force, while the Ba was the personality or soul that could move between the realms of the living and the dead. Marriage, in this spiritual framework, was a union of these elements as much as of bodies.
A harmonious marriage ensured that the cause of husband and wife would remain united, their baas finding each other even after death, enabling them to share eternity as they had shared life. This idea permeated Egyptian funerary texts and tomb inscriptions. Spouses often addressed each other in offering formulas, imploring the living to recite prayers on behalf of both. Tomb stelae sometimes featured joint appeals. May offerings be made for us in the name of the gods, that we may eat bread and drink beer together in the field of reeds. The afterlife, envisioned as a lush paradise mirroring the fertile Nile Valley, was not an isolated existence, but a continuation of family and community ties. Archaeological evidence vividly illustrates this eternal partnership. Tomb paintings and reliefs frequently depict couples seated side by side, hands clasped or arms draped affectionately over shoulders. Unlike the rigid hierarchical imagery of other ancient cultures, Egyptian art often portrayed spouses at equal scale, emphasizing companionship rather than dominance. Scenes of couples feasting together, tending gardens, or embracing beneath lotus blossoms evoke not merely funerary solemnity, but the enduring joys of love and domestic life. These intimate depictions extended even to royal tombs. In the Valley of the Queens, the tomb of Nefertari, beloved wife of Ramesses II, celebrates her beauty and partnership with the pharaoh. Inscriptions within the temple at Abu Simbel immortalize her as "she for whom the sun shines," suggesting a bond of personal devotion as well as royal duty. Such portrayals blurred the boundary between mortal affection and divine sanctity, elevating marital love to a cosmic ideal. The belief in eternal marriage influenced burial customs. Couples were often interred side by side, their tombs designed to mirror a shared household in the afterlife. Grave goods, food, clothing, amulets, and personal possessions were provided for both spouses, ensuring their comfort in eternity. Joint coffins or adjacent sarcophagi sometimes bore inscriptions affirming their union, joined in life, joined in death. Even among commoners, modest burials reflect this aspiration. Archaeologists have uncovered simple tombs where husband and wife lie together, accompanied by humble offerings, bread loaves, pottery, flowers. The message is consistent across social strata. Love, once formed, was not to be severed by death. Deities associated with love and family played crucial roles in protecting couples both in life and in the afterlife. Hathor, goddess of love and music, presided over joy and fertility, while Isis embodied faithful devotion, famously resurrecting her husband Osiris and conceiving their son Horus after his death. The myth of Isis and Osiris, central to Egyptian religion, provided a divine archetype for eternal partnership. Isis's unwavering love restored Osiris to life and ensured his reign as lord of the underworld. To the Egyptians, this story affirmed that true marital love could conquer even death itself. Protective amulets placed in tombs often bore symbols of unity: the knot of Isis, the Ankh, sign of life, or paired figures representing husband and wife. These objects were not mere decoration. They were believed to actively safeguard the couple's bond in the perilous journey through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, where the soul faced judgment before entering the field of reeds. Egyptian cosmology held that the deceased must undergo the weighing of the heart ceremony, in which the heart was balanced against the feather of Ma'at, truth and justice. A heart free of wrongdoing granted access to eternal life. One heavy with sin was devoured by Ammit, the soul-destroying beast. For couples, this judgment carried profound implications. Only by living righteously could they hope to reunite in the afterlife. Tomb inscriptions sometimes include mutual prayers, spouses pledging fidelity, kindness, and fairness so that they might be reunited before Osiris's tribunal. The afterlife itself, the field of reeds, was imagined as an idealized Egypt: fertile fields, abundant harvests, cool waters, and endless festivals. Here, couples farmed together, feasted with family, and enjoyed the pleasures of earthly life without toil or sorrow. Marital love thus provided comfort and motivation during life, offering the promise of eternal companionship in death. Royal couples elevated this belief to monumental scale. Temples and tombs celebrated not only the pharaoh's divine status, but also his partnership with the queen. At Abu Simbel, Ramesses II built twin temples, one for himself and one for Nefertari, aligned with the sun's rays to illuminate their statues during solar festivals. This architectural pairing symbolized their joint eternity, their love and power enshrined in stone. Such monuments ensured that future generations would witness and honor their union, bridging mortal and divine realms. Similarly, Akhenaten and Nefertiti's revolutionary art at Amarna depicted them in intimate family scenes, kissing their daughters, sitting together beneath the Aten's life-giving rays. These portrayals emphasized not only the sanctity of the royal family, but also a personal tenderness rarely seen in earlier royal iconography. The royal family's afterlife aspirations thus resonated with the common people's own hopes to remain united with loved ones beyond death. While commoners lacked the means for grand tombs or lavish monuments, their beliefs mirrored those of the elite. Simple graves often contained joint offerings, with inscriptions beseeching the living to say the offering formula, so that both husband and wife might enjoy bread, beer, and meat in the next world. Love poems inscribed on papyri or ostraca sometimes expressed longing for reunion beyond the grave, a testament to the deeply human desire for lasting companionship.
The universality of this belief is striking. Whether pharaoh or farmer, all Egyptians sought continuity of love. Marriage was not merely a contract for the present, but a covenant extending into eternity. Its success measured not only by earthly harmony, but by its endurance in the afterlife. The Egyptian vision of marriage as an eternal bond left an indelible mark on their culture. It permeated their art, shaped their burial practices, and infused their literature with themes of enduring affection. It also offers a profound counterpoint to later Western traditions that often separated earthly love from spiritual salvation. For the Egyptians, the two were inseparable. To love faithfully in life was to secure happiness and eternity. This belief lends Egyptian art and texts a timeless poignancy. The clasped hands carved into tomb walls, the tender verses exchanged between lovers, the joint prayers for offerings, all speak across millennia of the same human yearning, that love might outlast mortality, that partnership might endure beyond the grave. In their vision of the afterlife, marriage was not dissolved by death, but perfected, transformed into an everlasting union beneath the eternal sun. The story of love and marriage in ancient Egypt unfolds as a tapestry woven from practicality and passion, social order and personal affection, the mortal and the eternal. Across the centuries of the New Kingdom, this civilization nurtured a vision of family life that was at once deeply human and profoundly spiritual, a vision whose echoes still resonate in our understanding of relationships today. At the heart of Egyptian marriage lay a striking pragmatism. Unlike the elaborate religious rites that marked unions in Mesopotamia, Greece, or Rome, Egyptian marriage was forged through the simple act of establishing a shared home. The absence of ceremonial pomp did not signify a lack of meaning. Rather, it reflected a worldview in which the essence of marriage was partnership itself. A woman brought her belongings into her husband's house, and together they built a life defined not by ritual, but by daily cooperation, mutual care, and the shared responsibilities of family and community. Equally remarkable was the legal autonomy afforded to women. In an era when most ancient societies restricted female rights, Egyptian women owned property, engaged in commerce, and could initiate divorce. Marriage contracts safeguarded their assets and ensured fair treatment in cases of separation. This framework fostered an unusual balance between genders, allowing women to participate fully in the economic and familial life of their households. It also underscores the Egyptians' practical approach. Marriage was not merely a personal bond, but an economic partnership requiring clear protections for all involved. Yet within this pragmatic framework flourished the culture of open affection and romance. Love poetry celebrated longing and desire in frank, lyrical tones. Couples openly expressed intimacy, clasping hands, embracing, even kissing in public, in ways that astonished foreign observers like Herodotus. Far from shrouding sexuality in shame, Egyptians viewed it as a natural gift of the gods, integral to both joy and fertility. Their art, literature, and even wisdom texts reveal a society that embraced the emotional and physical dimensions of love as complementary, not contradictory. Family life formed the nucleus of this social world. Children were cherished, their upbringing a shared duty of mothers, fathers, and extended kin. The household, whether humble mud brick or grand estate, was a hive of activity. Grinding grain, baking bread, weaving textiles, tending gardens. Parents instructed their children not only in practical skills, but in moral virtues, respect, honesty, and the pursuit of ma'at, the cosmic balance that governed both personal conduct and the universe itself. Festivals and communal rituals reinforced these values, binding families to their neighbors and to the gods. Challenges, of course, were inevitable. Economic hardship, infidelity, and personal incompatibility tested marriages, yet the Egyptians approached such difficulties with characteristic pragmatism. Divorce, though regrettable, carried no religious stigma and was available to both men and women. Legal mechanisms ensured fairness, prioritizing the welfare of children and the equitable division of property. Even in dissolution, the Egyptian commitment to balance and justice endured, a reflection of their broader cultural ethos. Royal marriages, operating in a parallel realm, reveal another dimension of Egyptian society. Pharaohs and queens embodied divine archetypes, their unions serving as instruments of political alliance and symbols of cosmic order. Sibling marriages and polygamous arrangements, incomprehensible to modern sensibilities, were justified by myth and necessity, preserving dynastic purity and securing Egypt's imperial ambitions. Yet, even in this rarefied sphere, affection was not absent. Monuments to queens like Nefertari and Nefertiti immortalize bonds of genuine devotion alongside the trappings of power. Perhaps the most distinctive feature of Egyptian marriage was its orientation toward eternity. Unlike many ancient cultures that envisioned the afterlife as solitary or anonymous, Egyptians imagined it as a continuation of earthly joys, family, feasting, and companionship in the paradisical field of reeds. Tombs and stela depict couples united in death as in life, hands clasped, eyes turned toward one another, sharing offerings for eternity. Protective amulets, prayers, and mythic narratives, especially that of Isis and Osiris, affirmed a belief that true love could endure beyond the grave. In this fusion of the practical and the eternal lies the enduring fascination of Egyptian marriage. Their customs challenge modern assumptions that ancient societies were uniformly patriarchal, that love was subordinate to duty, that sexuality was repressed or shamed. Instead, the Egyptians reveal a different possibility, a culture that valued partnership, celebrated intimacy, and envisioned love as a force both human and divine. For modern audiences, the legacy of Egyptian love and marriage is twofold. On one hand, it offers a historical counterpoint, reminding us that gender equity and romantic openness are not uniquely modern ideals, but have ancient precedents. On the other, it speaks to universal human desires that transcend time and place. The longing for companionship, the search for balance between duty and affection, the hope that love might outlast mortality itself. As the sun sets over the Nile and the golden fields darken into twilight, we are left with an image carved into countless tomb walls. Two figures side by side, hands joined, eternal partners gazing toward the horizon. Across millennia, their silent embrace endures, a testament to the timeless truth that love, once kindled, seeks not only to endure life's hardships, but to conquer even death. Good night.